Genie in the Bottle is a creative design that provides a safe way to ask for and receive feedback in a group setting. It is also a useful vehicle for teaching an inexperienced group the fundamentals of good feedback. When we ask ourselves what differentiates high-performing teams from groups that seriously underperform, we have one test that rarely fails us. It is a simple question. Does the group give and receive feedback regularly, skillfully, and in real time? Without regular feedback, there is no ability to course correct, no way to evaluate performance, and no means of holding individuals or teams to particular standards. Feedback is at the heart of effective leadership and ensures opportunities for personal and organizational growth. It provides individuals, teams, and organizations information about performance and behavior that can be used to improve choices. Feedback conversations are difficult because they demand some skill in delivering feedback and readiness on the part of those receiving it. When using feedback, we must be conscious of both our reasons for doing so and the interest or willingness of those who will be receiving the feedback. What we experience, however, is that feedback in most teams and organizations remains a seriously avoided, sometimes abused, and often misunderstood aspect of leadership. This design is meant to shine a light on feedback and provide a means of practicing giving it in a safe and interesting way. Usually, the very idea of giving or receiving feedback feels challenging because more often than not, it's seen as a negative process. The Genie in the Bottle design is meant to change this association and during the process, build feedback skills while increasing both camaraderie and trust. Feedback is, theoretically, neither negative or positive. It is descriptive information about people and their behavior as they carry out their work. It should be an accepted and natural aspect of all leadership practices. This design is adapted from the story of Aladdin and the Magic Lamp. You know the one. Aladdin discovers a hidden cave and a treasure trove of gold and jewels. For some reason he is attracted to an old lamp in the back of the cave. As he is rubbing the dust off, a genie miraculously appears, announcing, "Master, you have 3 wishes." And that is the beginning of many stories and jokes about what Aladdin asked for and the trouble he caused. In this design, however, each person in the group has their own genie who will ask 3 questions on their behalf instead of granting wishes. The people in the room have to know one another, usually as colleagues who have observed one another in work situations, so that both knowledge and some trust are assumed and the group has sufficient willingness to participate in this process. This is important because everyone in the group will receive feedback from their peers. If you don't have these 2 elements, don't use this design. Choose other options from our 13 designs to first build the trust or the intimacy that is lacking. Usually we suggest a group size of at least 7 participants for this activity, but it can be run with up to 40. For larger groups, individuals will give their genie the names of only 10 people to provide feedback, otherwise you could be there all week gathering responses. Our process works well because people choose from whom they wish to receive feedback. Also, everybody in the room receives the same amount of feedback based on the same 3 questions. The information is then organised and analysed by each genie and fed back to each individual in a very prescribed manner. The design ensures that people on the team all share the same risk and nobody is going to end up with a huge dump of negative data. Everyone is encouraged to solicit feedback from a broad selection of people, which ensures the most honest and balanced feedback possible. Step 1. The setup. Divide the participants into groups of 3. Each group of 3 will have a person A, B, and C. Person A will be the genie for person B, person B the genie for person C, and person C the Genie for person A. If the number of people you have does not divide equally into threes, use some pairs as well. Tell the participants that any information generated in the activity will be anonymous, and feedback shared in the groups of three stays in the groups of three. It's important that this rule of anonymity be honoured. If you lack the confidence in this, choose another activity. Step 2. The rules. In these newly formed groups of three, ask them to consider what 4 or 5 rules must be established for the giving and receiving of feedback in a manner that is respectful and safe. Give them 10 minutes to craft their lists of inviolate rules of feedback. You will then take one idea at a time from each group and post it on a flip chart. To keep the rules from being a huge laundry list, for each idea offered, ask the rest of the group if they have anything similar and add check marks to the item you just wrote to represent these. When you pare the rules down, the list rarely ends up being more than 4 or 5 rules long. Here are a few of our favourites. Describe the behaviour. Give an example of specific behaviour. Explain how the behaviour makes people feel. Give the feedback as close as possible to the time that it occurred. Use the information as a stimulus to change behaviour if the recipient chooses. The point of this exercise is to teach the participants the skill of giving feedback and let them practice it before they go collect the data in their role of Genie. Here's a really top tip. Having generated the list from the group at this point, tell them that describing the individual's behaviour specifically with examples is key, and not to place judgments in the conversation such as, "You're a bad person." Remind the group that feedback is neither positive nor negative. It is just information that the receiver can accept and use or not. If a participant doesn't like the feedback, they can call it negative. There is no obligation to accept the feedback. However, if the majority of those interviewed have agreed to an issue or two, the person might want to seriously consider them. Let's say that several people tell your Genie that you tend to interrupt a lot. Is that negative or positive? Of course, you can choose to be annoyed and defensive. But if you choose to see the information as helpful, you can make it positive, even see it as a gift. Similarly, the feedback that you intimidate people is useful only if the recipient knows the behaviour that creates the feeling of intimidation in others. General statements like, "You are friendly," are not helpful because you need to know what you do to warrant being called friendly. So the Genies should be encouraged to ask for an example or two. It's the Genie's job to bring their Aladdin useful information. Specific and descriptive behaviours tend to keep those pesky judgments out. The whole point of the Genie is to provide people with choices that can be used to increase their effectiveness. Step 3. The questions. The newly formed groups of 3 give each other the names of up to 10 people from whom they would like to receive feedback. If you have a very small group, fewer than 12, there is no need to nominate whom they want to receive feedback from. Just ask everybody. Quality responses with useful examples is the key. The participants are then given the following 3 questions. 1. What are X's 3 greatest strengths they bring to the team or the job? Please be specific. 2. What are X's 3 areas of improvement that would help them become an even more effective leader or team member? Again, please be specific. 3. What are 2 things X needs to be told, but for whatever reason, people might be reluctant to tell them? We assume that people want to know the answer, even if it is uncomfortable. Step 4. The Genie. Suggest to the group that Genies separate one page in their notebooks for each question. This makes it easier to organise the data later. Then give them 1 hour to go around the room and interview each person on their list with all 3 questions. Again, encourage specific and descriptive examples. With lots of people seeking information, it's likely that some individuals will be more sought out than others. Therefore, it's important to stay focused on the 3 questions and keep moving. About 5 minutes per person works best to ensure the design does not create problems around time. Initially, with lots of people seeking individuals to ask questions, it may feel a bit chaotic, but that's part of the fun, and soon people will sense a certain rhythm to the process. Step 5. Organising the data. After the hour of interviews, the genies go off by themselves to organise their data. Again, check in on how the group is doing. If after 40 or 50 minutes you sense most people need additional time, let the group know that you're adding an additional 10 minutes. We use our process of truths, trends, and unique ideas to organise the data and to feed the information back to each Aladdin. It's a process that we often combine with other designs, such as future search, 6-step problem solving, or carousel. If you've already learned this process from using another one of our 13 designs, you can skip this part. Truths. A truth is a statement made repeatedly by those interviewed. It may include 50% of those responding or more. It's such a consistent piece of information that it leaps off the page, simply cannot be denied, and must be heard by the person. Among the 3 questions, there may be 1, 2, or many truths. Usually there are some. Occasionally, the responses from questions 2 and 3 are similar, and together they add up to a truth. Also, in looking at the person's strengths, it is often useful to see if some of their areas of needed development could be the result of overusing a strength, a common and interesting insight. For example, a friendly person might be averse to conflict, because if they engaged in conflict, they might be seen as not so friendly. Trends. A trend is information that does not appear as frequently as a truth, but needs to be recognised. If a person interviews 10 people and 3 or 4 suggested the same thing, it would be categorised as a trend rather than a truth. Unique ideas. Often, individuals being interviewed have a different perspective, an insight that the genie believes should not be lost. There won't be many, but 2 or 3 creative ideas may be seen as important to share. This is the genie's call as to whether they believe the information will be valuable to the receiver. Step 6. The feedback. This is the time when the groups of 3 get back together again and begin sharing their data. A gives B feedback, B gives C feedback, and so on. It is also the time to listen carefully to the information being provided, with the person receiving the feedback asking questions for clarification. If A is giving B feedback, C also listens carefully because occasionally they may have something to add, such as a new insight or another example. This is B's time to ask clarifying questions, not the time to try to fix things. In this instance, A's job is to frame the feedback and offer it in a way that B can hear. The goal for B is to hear the information and to explore it with the other 2 people. Talking about how the information feels to B is also part of the equation. Because this is strictly information sharing, each person takes only about 15 minutes before moving on to the next person. Again, there will be time for problem solving later. This time is purely for clarifying the data from the interviews. It is a time to gain understanding in relation to the feedback they just received. Note that this design is diagnostic in nature and should not be used to solve issues. Instead, use the 6-step problem-solving design or another model at a later time. Step 7. The wrap-up. After all the groups have shared their information, a closing circle of all the participants occurs. Here it is useful to go around and ask how each person feels about their data and the process, and have them share one fact or insight they are taking from the experience. Here's another really top tip. Make sure this final go-around is affirming. Some people may report a piece of feedback that makes them feel bad. Have them put a positive spin on it by asking, "So how can that be helpful?" Or ask to hear one of their more positive pieces of feedback instead. If additional time is available after completing the activity, it is often helpful to move straight into the 6-step problem-solving design as a follow-up. Here, each person would take an issue, a piece of data from their feedback, and dive into it with the goal of bringing greater insight to the information and developing strategies for improvement. If there is no time, it can be useful for the 3-person groups to meet on their own to complete the 6-step problem-solving design. We suggest this because it is rare to have such an experience with individuals you now trust. Once the Genie in the Bottle design has been completed, participants can share the insights gained with their leaders as part of their regular supervisory or appraisal process. It's a perfect opportunity to build support and develop greater trust in these relationships. A word of caution, though. In our conflict-averse society, where feedback is not often a meaningful part of workplace culture, individuals can go years without receiving useful feedback. For some, even though they may want it, it can be very difficult to receive. Participants in this process ought to be involved in some kind of follow-up, either with a supervisor or with the group that they work with during the design. Key questions to be considered during the follow-up would be how they feel about the feedback they received and what they are planning to do with it. Scaling the design. In this example, we used a group of 8, which gave us 2 subgroups of 3 and a pair. If we had 40 members, this would result in 12 groups of 3 and 2 pairs. Try to have as many groups of 3 as possible, and then use pairs to make the math work. Here is a summary of the 7 steps with the time needed for each. Step 1, the setup. Step 2, the rules. Step 3, the questions. Step 4, the Genie. Step 5, organising the data. Step 6, the feedback. And Step 7, the wrap-up. The total design takes 3 to 4 hours.